make their way to the stage, I want to welcome Rotarians, our guests, and those that are viewing online. President Herbold has a conflict today, so I have the honor of presiding for today's meeting. And as I prepared for today's meeting, I reflected on just where we're at as a community today, both as a community and as a country, almost a year into a global pandemic. It brought to my mind the story of James Stockdale. Some of you may be familiar with his story. For those that are not, if you allow me just to share. James Stockdale was a former vice presidential candidate who, during Vietnam War, was held captive as a prisoner of war for over 7 years. He was one of the highest-ranking naval officers at that time. And during his 7 years in captivity, Stockdale was repeatedly tortured and had no reason to believe that he'd make it out alive. As he lived through this grim reality of his world as it was, he found a way to stay alive by embracing both the harshness of his current situation with the balance of healthy optimism. And he explained it this way. He said, "You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with a discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be." And the simplest explanation of the Stockdale paradox is the idea of hoping for the best and acknowledging and preparing for the worst. And Jim Collins, who wrote Good to Great, who some of you may be familiar with, it sat down with Mr. Stockdale when he was writing his book, and this is how it went. He asked about who didn't make it out of captivity, and James Stockdale said, "Oh, that's easy. It was the optimists." And Jim responded, "The optimist? I don't understand." He was confused. He said, "Yeah, the optimists, they were the ones who said we'd be out of here by Christmas, and then Christmas would come and Christmas would go. Then they'd say, we're going to be out of here by Easter. Easter would come, Easter would go, and then Thanksgiving, and then it'd be Christmas." He said they died of a broken heart. The reason I share that story in so many ways this last year has been challenging for all of us. It's flipped our world upside down. We haven't been able to see loved ones. Whether you're running a business, you're part of the community, it's changed our lives in so many ways. But I believe our community has done a fantastic job of exemplifying the Stockdale paradox. And I want to thank you, our Rotarians, members of our community, for your resolve and your ability to balance that sense of realism with the situation that we're in, with optimism of a better tomorrow. And while it's been challenging for so many, I just think that we've come alongside our neighbors, our fellow Rotarians, and really demonstrated that Stockdale paradox. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. Ask you to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, with liberty and justice for all. I'd ask Andy Patterson to come forward for the invocation.
Please bow with me. Lord, we thank you for this day that you've given us and the opportunity to gather here at Rotary. As we consider today's discussion, Lord, we stand amazed at the technology that exists and continues to develop through the talent and creativity you bestowed on so many. Guide our leaders and help us as a community to use it to create opportunities and equity for all in our community. So Lord, again, we ask you bless this meal, our conversations, and our time together. In your name we pray, amen.
All right, you may be seated. All right, we are going to introduce guests, and it's been a while since we've actually introduced our guests individually, but we're going to go ahead and start that again. And I'm going to go ahead and start. I have a guest here, Daniel Hager, if you want to go ahead and rise. Daniel Hager, as of January 4th, is our Minnehaha County State's Attorney, and excited to have him here today as a guest and have him serving our community in that role of lead prosecutor. So thanks for being here today, Daniel. All right, and Matt Paulson agreed to travel with the mic so that our Rotarians don't have to hold the mic, but we just asked that the Rotarian introduce their guest. And the next on the list, Terry Liggins, you are a guest of Matt Paulson, so we'll let you stay right where you're at, Matt.
Yeah, Terry and I had coffee this morning. He said, "Hey, can I come to Rotary today?" And I said, "Absolutely." Terry is with the Hurdle Life Foundation. It's exciting that he got all his funding for his pilot program to mentor recently incarcerated people. So looking forward to seeing great things out of Terry in the next couple months. So welcome, Terry.
Welcome, Terry. And Matt, our next Rotarian that has a guest is Laura Mitchell.
Hi, Laura Mitchell at Lawrence and Schiller. I have my colleague Travis Adney. He's the Director of Technology and Operations. So I thought this would be a perfect topic for him to tag along with me.
Welcome, Travis. All right. Well, thank you again for being here today. And our topic, like Laura mentioned, is technology. It's a lot more than that. And we have Vani Herrera, Rotarian, who's going to moderate today. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to him shortly. But I ran into the mayor over the weekend and shared how we were excited to have him at Downtown Rotary. To which he responded, "You think the Rotarians are getting a little mayoral fatigue?" And I said, "Absolutely not." And in all sincerity, I would just express appreciation for your willingness to be transparent during this time. Community citizens are looking for open communication and transparency, and we appreciate having the mayor back, even if it's 2 weeks in a row. So thanks for being here, Mayor. And our next guest, Mike Grigsby, if you haven't had a chance to meet him yet, one of the newest members to our community, actually came last spring and got a chance to connect with him through the Spark Sioux Falls initiative over the summer. And it didn't take long in sitting down and having a conversation with him to know why the mayor and his team were so excited to welcome Mr. Grigsby as their new Director of Innovation and Technology. And in Mike's position, he's focused on identifying engagement opportunities to improve organizational efficiencies, enhance citizen engagement, and build a smart and connected community. He brings a depth of experience from his previous roles in both public and private sector positions, and has consulted on a variety of subjects, including smart cities, information technology, leadership and organizational development, as well as change management. I'd ask that you please join me in giving Mike Grigsby a warm Rotary welcome. Vani, the floor is yours. Thank you again for moderating today's conversation.
Thank you, good sir. Appreciate you. Quick story about Mike and myself. Mike's wife is from around here, and he was out visiting her family, was walking through the mall, saw a kiosk for Think 3D, reached out. We had lunch. I went and saw him in Kansas City, where he was still doing some things around those parts, and we talked about innovation and technology and all of these crazy things, smart cities, culture, all of that stuff. And then one day I walk into Josiah's and I see him sitting there with Erica Beck, the chief of staff for the mayor. And I got so excited because I was like, oh, I know what this is about. And and surely enough, you made the move. So I'm super excited to be able to have you here and both of you here. And for you, Mr. Mayor, there's a couple things that you did in particular that I thought were really great in terms of what it means for a city. One obviously is culture. As you know, I'm passionate about giving that a real position, a real focus, and a commitment to it, especially with all of the folks that we have within the city, even. The other one being innovation in technology. Why innovation in technology? Why was it important enough to create a position, one, and then recruit someone of this caliber, two?
Well, great question. But first, I got to start with a story too. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so you're looking at two of the most rested guys in Sioux Falls, and I'd say that because the other day, this was like a month ago. You know where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
I was in the Sleep Number store. I need a new bed. My back is bad. So I'm reverting to the sleep number. If you have a sleep number, anybody have a sleep number? You have to like second mortgage your house to get one, but they're nice beds. Bonnie's in there too. And we're lamenting over our sleeping problems. And Bonnie ended up getting like the Cadillac. It's got beer holders on it, and it just does all these crazy things. I had to get the public salary,
don't you
public
even try it.
government one. But I hope your sleep number's working out.
Man, I tell you
I'm
what.
about a 40, 45.
Listen, I'm a 45 too.
All right.
See that?
That's good.
Right there.
But on the innovation though, when I started in the city of Sioux Falls, we had a department called the Central Services Department. And the Central Services Department in the city was IT, it was facilities, it was our GIS, which we have recently rebranded to our civil analytics team, which I'm sure we'll talk about. It was just kind of a department where leftover departments went. And our IT team specifically, in a modern government today, to have IT not at a big table and to have the focus around IT that I felt we needed as a city, I thought was a real weak spot for us. So we began with rebranding that department to say, okay, central services is not indicative of what we need this department to be doing. We need a department of innovation and technology. And you'd be surprised at simply by what putting a name on something can do to a team. All right, when you say you're no longer the central services team, you're the Department of Innovation and Technology, which means you are going to incubate and bubble up innovative ideas, not only in your lanes of responsibility, but across the organization. So it essentially gave them a hall pass to say, we got something new we need to be doing in fire. Feel free to incubate that idea. So a better way we can do policing should come out of this team. Feel free to incubate those ideas here. And it created a new kind of focus that I wanted to instill in the team, that we needed to start to experiment more. And I think government specifically is not real famous for risk-taking and experimenting. The private sector, we laud it. Elon Musk can experiment and lose billions of dollars, and he's a genius, and they don't make any money yet, and it's incredible. In government, if you experiment and even just screw up a little bit and fail a little bit, that doesn't go over well. So risk-taking in government is very hard, and it's hard to say to the teams, hey, try this. If we screw up, no big deal, because it is a big deal, because it's not our money. It's the taxpayers' money. And so Mike has been the right guy to take that baton, because Mike understands, from having a private sector background and a public sector background, the importance of risk-taking in city government, but also the fact that when we fail very publicly. Yeah. And when we screw up on something, we screw up very publicly. And so there's been a new culture of innovation that's been instilled in the city. It's been exciting to see, even in the last couple of years, what's come of that, which we'll talk about more.
Yeah. So, Mike, to you, as being the head of the risk taker department, that's a scary position, right? To be able to do these type of things. So when you think about innovation, how do you approach it? How do you think about it from a smart city concept that we'll talk about a little bit more later? But how do you approach innovation from that position?
I think it's a single word. It's outcomes. So much of what our department does in the broader aspect of not only within the organization, but within the city itself, within the community, we have to think about the outcomes, right? There is real impact to Joe and Jill Q citizen, as well as Jill and Jill Q worker. So we have to think about what that's going to do. There's a joke been around for a long time. It's, government doesn't have enough money to do it right, but they have enough money to do it again. And we have to think about the better way of approaching these projects. So it's not just innovative from a lip service or from a title, but that it's innovative so that there's a real outcome to move the needle forward, to say, here, this is growth, this is evolution, right? I mean, there is so much that citizens don't understand how their interaction with the city is and where it comes from. And we have to think about, how do we create better services? How do we create better touch points for citizens? As well as, how do we find operational efficiencies? How do we find better ways to use the resources that we have? How do we maximize that? And so to say, how do I think about the innovation process? It's always through the lens of outcomes. What are we actually going to accomplish on the backside of this? Not just busy work, not just, hey, here's a program that we're doing, or here's something shiny and new. How do we actually have tangible outcome and impact on the backside of that project.
To that point, we are a very, or a typically conservative, pragmatic community, right? We're measured. You know, sometimes we give up peaks and we don't have valleys, right? We're very right down the middle. So when you talk about innovation and technology, it has a lot to do with mind state. And how have you all been managing that piece of it to get people bought into the idea of being able to take those risks, of using taxpayer dollars to do things that obviously we believe will save us a lot of dollars in the long run? But how have you been working to shift that mind state to get people open to the idea of innovation and technology?
Well, I think one way is you keep talking about it, in that a lot of times, you know, the phrase we hear a lot of right now in politics is we need to drain the swamp. We need to get new ideas. We need to get new people in there. We need to get fresh, innovative ideas. And then when you bring those, people are like, whoa, whoa, whoa. We've always, you mess with transit, okay, I'm sure we'll talk about transit. We've been trying to experiment with on-demand transit and creating a new way to do transit. There's a lot of people that are very resistant to change. So it's important that you take small steps. So a lot of you don't even maybe know this, but for the past, I don't know, 5 or 6 weeks, we've been experimenting on the weekends with on-demand transit, on Saturdays, running this on-demand pilot. Basically, think of Lyft or Uber for public transit. We've been experimenting with this in the background, because if we do this very publicly, we right now, we're averaging probably a C minus on how this is going. And we don't, the public doesn't like C minuses. So I think doing some things in a very calculated, slow way to get people comfortable that it's like, hey, we're not going to change transit all of a sudden on March 1. We're experimenting on a time when hours are really slow. No one will even notice, and it will give us the data we need to now move another 2 degrees and another 2 degrees. That's been one way that we've slowly eased people into that.
Well, you just did a number on yourself, because you're going to have about 20, 30 emails by the time you get back to the office, now that you said it.
I know. I don't know if people were supposed to know we were doing that. I guess they know now. So
They probably do now.
Good luck, Mike.
I think honestly, helping people think about the way they think about things, and that sounds kind of a very, very mental heavy way of looking at it, but Vince Lombardi talks about it. He said, there's nothing wrong. Everybody wants to prepare to win, but you have to have the will to prepare to win. And I think when you start to, especially when you start to look at change, people don't even know what their relationship is to the thing that we're trying to change before. I mean, just by a show of hands, how many of you know about sailing? Okay, right? So if I was to talk about all the great change that we could do for sailing, you don't even know what your relationship is yet to sailing. So I could be talking about all kinds of amazing, truly awesome things, but you don't even know where your baseline is. And helping people to understand what the baseline is for innovation, for transit change, or for cultural change, establishing what the relationship is, and then helping you change your thinking about that is one of the things that we have to do. So there's a lot of groundwork that has to be laid ahead of time just in getting the nomenclature, right? We may call it a whatchamacallit, somebody else may call it a doohickey, right? But we might be talking about the same thing. So when it comes to change, and we start talking about some of these projects, 5G is a great one. 5G has all this great promise, but people really don't understand what that promise is going to be and translate that into benefit. So we have to methodically help people get through this from hey, here's what this is. We want everybody to start with this. Then we're going to go to the next step and the next step. And internally, my team is probably very, very tired of hearing me talk about this all the time, because they want to get to the technical and technical parts of this. Hey, what are we going to do tomorrow? What are we actually going to, and I bring them back and like, here's what I want you to think about what we're going to do tomorrow. And let's get on the same page here before we can actually go into the next step. And that tends to make things take a little longer, but the point is we have sustainable effort. Right? It's not just a flash in the pan. It's not just a project that we're talking about and has a great buzzword or great fanfare. It's something that is actually going to move us forward, and changing thinking will absolutely change outcomes. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's stay with 5G, because obviously that's one of the intro level, well, I shouldn't say intro level, but one of the major components to us transitioning into that kind of smart city. And we're on the front end of that which people may not expect, particularly nationally, right? So what is the deal with 5G?
Well, right now we have what we call 5G small cells that are being rolled out across the city. If you see a Vicor truck, chances are it's installing a 5G small cell in Sioux Falls somewhere. 5G, at its kind of technological base, is a series of what they call small cells that have to be positioned very closely in order to have the connectivity and the speed that 5G offers. We're used to a cell tower. There's 5 cell towers around, and you call and you get 3 bars or 4 bars. 5G relies on those towers, i.e. those cells, to be much closer to triangulate signals to get a much stronger signal. So that's basically what 5G is. What a lot of consumers don't fully understand, nor should they, because it's so new, is 5G is really not about these. You can already stream movies on the, how much faster does your phone need to be? Your phone works pretty dang good. 5G is more centered around technological innovation and smart city technology that we maybe haven't even envisioned yet. So tons of examples, but the example that gets used a lot is autonomous vehicles. If autonomous vehicles are to be successful and to be safe and to be adopted by society, there needs to be a very what called low latency in the connectivity. So that car has to be connected to the internet to run. Well, if someone in front of you slams on their brakes and you're in an autonomous vehicle, you don't want a slow internet speed that's going to tell your car to brake. That has to be extremely low latency so that the signal is right there instantly, faster than even a human could do. Those are the sorts of innovations that come with 5G. Internet of Things, sensors in pavements, self-reporting potholes, so people don't have to report them, but the sensors in the pavement actually can read where deteriorations are starting to happen. Those are technologies that will come with 5G. Part of the reason, though, why Sioux Falls, a few reasons why Sioux Falls is kind of on the front end of 5G. One is certainly Senator John Thune. So Senator Thune being on the Science, Transportation, and Commerce Committee, or formerly chairing that. He has a lot of pull in DC, as we know. And the FCC was looking for what are those communities that are open to the policies and kind of the protocols that are needed for successful 5G rollout. So let me tell you what that means. In San Jose, okay, Silicon Valley, San Jose, a 5G small cell needs to go up on a pole, and it's on a city pole. And the city will say, okay, Verizon, we'll let you put a 5G small cell on this pole, and we're going to charge you $5,000 permitting fee and then a $10,000 annual license to use our right-of-way to have your small cell there. Well, Verizon will say, dude, at $10,000 a year, and we need literally hundreds and hundreds of these, it doesn't make that's a non-starter. Well, San Jose said, well, we want to use that money for a digital equity fund to fund more broadband access, and so they were using it to try and fund more programs. Sioux Falls comes in and we say, Verizon, you want a small cell? We'll charge you $75 to permit it and $250 a year. That basically covers our costs to service it, to site it, to maintain it there. So we're just breaking even. We're not seeing that as a revenue generation source, because the revenue, the upside for a community, is not squeezing the ISPs. It's the innovation, being an early adopter, the economic development, all those things that come from having an active 5G network. So it's two vastly different approaches. And so that's why the Verizons and the AT&Ts and even the FCC has really noticed that, man, this approach that Sioux Falls is taking is one that they're not trying to squeeze the ISPs for more dollars. They're trying to say, hey, we welcome you here. We just want to break even, and we want the technology, because that makes cybersecurity firms, for instance, that may be interested in Sioux Falls, or cybersecurity HQs, or that need a different level of access in order to innovate. And they see that sort of kind of government policy that's really easy to work with. It makes them much more likely to want to come here and maybe plant a flag here and start their business here. So that's kind of the approach we've taken with 5G, which is why we've been one of the early adopters with getting these small cells rolled out.
Awesome. Let me ask you this as a quick follow-up, because to that strategy, Obviously, it makes sense because we got people here, they want to invest in here, but there is something to be said for the strategy of creating revenue to be able to fund programming, to be able to take advantage, because it's expensive sometimes to take advantage of new technologies. Is there a plan, or what is, and I don't know who's best to answer this question, but is there a plan or is there approach for us doing that, right? We have it now, we're going to have it. How do we make sure that it is available for developers and those folks within South Dakota to be able to take advantage of this great opportunity?
We'll talk about idea on that. It's kind of a segue into
Okay.
that.
Yeah. So you're right, Monty. There has to be at least a strategy, at least an idea of what's out on the horizon there. As Sioux Falls looks at what those opportunities are, there are both near-term and long-term projects or initiatives that we want to look at. So this past summer, we created the IDEA Task Force. So this is the Inclusion Digital Equity Alliance, and that task force is designed with helping bridge the digital divide. And when we look at the digital divide, people will start to ask, what does that mean, and what's the benefit of us bridging that gap? First of all, the digital divide is bringing equity to people from broadband internet access to accessible devices, and then to digital literacy, understanding what this really means being connected or in a connected community. Well, the challenge of that is if people have built a lifestyle not being connected, how do we get them to a baseline to say what's next? And on top of that, how do we invite not just our existing community, but partners from outside to come in and say, here are additional audiences you might not have had access to, or here's additional opportunities for you to build within Sioux Falls and provide additional opportunities. So when we think about long-term, 5G is a great, you called it a kind of a core or an entry level. I think it's a great foundational piece to look at to say, how does this affect what we want to do? Here, the city has already looked at smart meters, parking meters. We're getting ready to update those because our meters are kind of at end of life and ready for a next version, right? Those next meters are going to be 5G enabled. That means that they can be part of a connected mesh. So it's not just one meter connected to the network, but it's that meter knowing what's happening to the meter next to it, that's happening to a meter across town, and so forth, so that we have a better strategy of how people would engage with parking, something as simple as parking, right? Again, that 5G builds out a network, a mesh of all the different things that we can do to have smart pavement, to have smart air sensors, air quality sensors, to understand whether today is a day that you really need sunscreen out or if you don't need sunscreen, right? Things along those lines. How do we get a better quality of life, which is really what we're aiming for, those efficiencies and then a better quality of life.
So just staying on 5G here real quick as it pertains to IDEA. So the thing about 5G is with those particular waves is that they don't travel terribly well and they don't penetrate, which means we have to have a healthy amount of nodes. And so just thinking about, number one, the facade of our community, the actual look of it and what that looks like, the practicality of it in terms of how it is that works, and then whatever potential effects that having so much energy might have. What does that look like? What does that plan look like? I mean, are we talking about these things being built into other things? Are we talking about, are there going to be these poles everywhere? What should we look forward to as it pertains to 5G?
Well, two great questions. If there are two detriments to 5G rollout right now that communities are experiencing, one, it's misinformation around the health impacts of 5G and millimeter wave technology. I'll touch on that. And then the second is just the aesthetics of having these small cells. So we're currently working with the McKenna Park neighborhood, have small cells put up, and they have some of those more historic light poles, and don't want any nodes on there. They don't want any of these small cells on there. So a lot of times there's neighborhood pushback to say these are ugly. We don't want them here. A lot of times you wouldn't even notice them. You'd have to really be looking for them to see them. But they are new. If you're used to this pole being totally clean and now there's something on it and it's right outside of your house in your boulevard, you would notice it. So we're working with groups on that. But the the former piece, though, about health. So again, the FCC, or the Federal Communications Commission, is the jurisdiction over the health impact for all communications, right? What health impacts are there for millimeter wave technology or any technology that is used in communications? The FCC has deemed through extensive studies that 5G and millimeter wave technology in the doses that it's utilized for with 5G small cells is safe. The challenge, though, with that is, and I'll get a little conspiracy theorist here, is there is certainly an incentive for other countries to create a dialogue that this is really dangerous and that to spread misinformation to slow down the U.S. rollout of 5G because of the global position that it would put us in as a leader. And so there's all kinds of documented cases of Russian interference specifically on 5G misinformation that's out there. And I get people sending me articles all the time. Here's an article from, sciencehealthblog.net, and they'll send it to me. It's like, it says it right here. And I'm like, well, you got to look at the source. And this isn't a real thing even. And so we are tasked, and I say we because I sit on what's called the Intergovernmental Advisory Committee from the FCC. I actually chair this committee. And one of our tasks from the FCC chairman is to create a new local government officials guide that details the health ramifications of 5G millimeter waves and why it's safe. And we're working on that right now. So we'll be able to roll that out in communities with FAQs, with infographics, with so forth. That will show that this is a safe technology.
Yeah.
But that's still probably the number one challenge right now is the misinformation around the health impacts of 5G. And I'll tell you, in this room right now with all the cell phones, these cameras, these mics, there's more frequency in this room right now than you'll get standing near a 5G, small cell.
Well, let's keep the conspiracies going. So,
I love it.
We're talking about this smart city where my parking meters are talking to each other. Okay, what's to say that I'm not walking down the street, my parking meter is watching me, the lamp is watching me, everything is sending off a signal. When we talk about, and again, Dakota, we love our privacy, our liberty, and all of those other type of things. Now, I'm not saying that you would do this, but there's clearly an opportunity for something like this to be used for nefarious means or whatever. What are the safeguards for these things? What is the root of the policy and how we utilize these things? What is some of that stuff?
Well, I'll speak to that, and you can chime in if you have anything. But I've seen in the last year more and more cities that have adopted ordinances banning like facial recognition technology. Saying we will not utilize this technology in our municipality or in our county to give their residents a feeling of safety that technology isn't utilized. Well, you also have to realize that you give up a lot as well when you ban that technology. I mean, when you look at Capitol riots and other things, that technology is at play, and that's helping keep our communities safe. So I think it's important to know that there's always going to be, law enforcement and legal uses to use technology for the health and wellness and safety of the community. But there's also privacy boundaries that we legally cannot cross and have to always disclose, when someone walks into a building and there may be cameras or they may be recorded. We have to be transparent about that. Sioux Falls, I've talked about this with our police chief about, do we need to come out with some sort of position on facial recognition technology? And if we're going to use that, and if we are, how do we have to be more transparent and so forth? Right now, that technology is not being utilized by our PD. So, but it's something that we'll be looking at in the future and have to determine how that fits in.
Yeah.
So I don't have a good answer
for sure
on you, but I think the more you can be transparent with people and say, this is how we're using it, this is the benefit of using it, and get people comfortable with that, the better.
We're naturally hypocritical about it, right? We want things all fast. Boston Marathon bombers were caught in hours amidst millions of people in a boat in someone's backyard. You don't do that without having some of those other tools at your disposal. At the same time, I don't want it on me, right? So do you have anything to add to that, Mike?
I would just kind of echo what the mayor is saying, is that not only do you give up a lot, but I think there's some misinformation about what the government is doing with this information. One, I've sat on an advisory council, Smart City Advisory Council, where we were putting these kinds of policies in place to say it has to be anonymized, it has to be, right, putting these things in to set some of those guardrails. The other thing too is that, you know, the perception is that there's somebody sitting at a monitor watching what somebody is doing all day long. There's so much data and so much information, the ability to be able to go, even through machine learning, the ability to do that. We just don't have that technology and that capability right now. You know, the other thing too is, you know, those helps right now that we've seen, you know, we talk about the Boston Marathon, that was government looking for something very specific. It didn't just pop up from that standpoint, right? And so without that kind of initial input, there's no automated response for those kinds of things. Certainly not yet. The technology is absolutely going to get there, but we're not there now. So it's important to have those conversations now about what those guardrails are, about how we want to step.
But
into
once
that.
everyone's vaccinated, they'll have this chip in them.
Right.
Everyone's been following
We'll
that.
be good at that point.
Hey, don't start it, man. 'Cause like I said, you're good. You're gonna get the email.
I've heard about that one a lot too. So
as you will, as you will. Okay, I want to ask you one more on just our infrastructure, and then I really want to dive into the digital divide piece of it. But as we talk about infrastructure, right? Our approach to it, because a lot of times you can't build it when you need it. And so we have to be we have to be spending money in these things, building things that we don't necessarily have, you know, as much of a use case for in those type of things. The other piece of it is, even with 5G, I would assume that 6G would be 5G only that could travel longer and penetrate. That's my rudimentary thought process on that. So are we going to need to do new stuff? How forward thinking is this technology that we're spending so much time, energy, and effort getting up, being that we don't have immediate uses for all those things, because there's a supportive technology that has to go along with all of those other things.
yeah.
And so what makes this something that we don't have to redo in 5 years? What makes this something that is worth doing now?
Well, the nice thing about specifically about 5G is this is not costing the taxpayer a dime to roll out a 5G network. I mean, we have cited and done kind of initially when we worked with Verizon and AT&T, we did some fake small cell installation siting. We say it's going to take on average 4.5 hours of staff time, so forth, at an average hourly wage of this. So this is what's going to cost. That's what we're getting paid by the ISPs. So it's on their back to roll this out. So they're highly incentivized to make sure this technology has longevity and shelf life. But if 6G comes around in 10 years, whatever that is, that's going to be on the backs of those ISPs. Says, okay, now we got to pay to change this. We got to put in new towers. We got to take these down. So I think that's somewhat of hopefully the smart way that we're licensing this and we're working with the carriers is to make sure the taxpayers know this isn't costing you anything. Because a lot of times people will say to me, man, the mayor's spending all this money on a 5G rollout and a 5G network. It's like, no, it's not costing the taxpayers a dime.
That's good to know. That's a big one.
Yeah, I think also just kind of protecting the return on investment too.
Yeah.
You know, you mentioned 6G. If 6G was to roll out today, we're not going to begin investing into that changeover. It's just the cost of doing that it's not smart. So we have to think about, you know, how do we get a far enough look out on the horizon to say this is how much we can quote unquote future proof this, and know that we're going to get these incremental changes or this growth over time. And then when we get to here, we'll start to look at what's next and so forth. It's really just the rate of how we can metabolize all of this change, because we know that, I mean, technology is constantly changing. It's constantly pushing new things towards us. It's giving us new opportunities. It's promising new things. We just can't move. We can't metabolize it as fast as it's coming out. So we have to say, okay, over the next 3 to 5 years, where do we think we're going to be? What's the infrastructure that we have to look at? Put that in, build towards that, and then say, you know, hopefully we can find some leveraging effect of what we've just accomplished over the last 5 years to go into the next, whatever that change is going to indicate.
And there's some connectivity dead spots, you know, within a 9 iron of city limits where people are, you know, they'll reach out and they'll be like, love that you're doing this 5G stuff. I wish I could get, you know, something higher than 56K at my farm, right, you know, by Crooks or wherever, because there's just certain dead spots that exist. And so I think that's what we have to remember is, like, while we're preparing for 5G, we can't forget that there's just this evolution of technology. I think the governor's proposing a lot of money to be spent on rural broadband in this budget. I think that's a very smart proposal, because there's catch up rurally that we have to realize that Sioux Falls is not the same, as
Right.
Puckwana in terms of this.
Right.
And they're not going to be looking at 5G anytime soon.
Yeah.
They're just looking at some sort of high speed connection.
Yeah. Well, and to that point, all of this stuff is cool, but for me, the only value that it has is what it does for people and our quality of life. And it has been the story of the world that access and disproportionate access to resources, whether it be from access to water, to access to utilities, access to affordable housing, to now people have been talking about the access to internet and specifically broadband for decades. We probably had the clearest example of how important that is by people having to have their kids be educated all at one time. And we knew that people weren't really prepared for it. We weren't able to do that the world wasn't able to do that on scale. How does all of this fold into bridging that divide? What does that tangibly mean for a human? What does that mean for a working class person who's trying to make ends meet, and $150 on broadband is a luxury, or they don't have they're not the sexy part of town where people are trying to build all of these cool things? What does it mean for the average?
So I brought a couple stats on that. I thought this group would be interested in hearing. So a survey called the American Community Survey in 2019 looked at a whole bunch of things, including internet access and connectivity. And close to 1/3 of homes in the US, 1/3 making less than $35,000 a year, did not have internet access. And you compare that to homes who have a household income of 75 grand or more, only 3% don't have internet access. So there's a huge equity disparity when it comes to income levels and connectivity. Roughly 1/4 of households in Sioux Falls, all households in Sioux Falls, do not have a cable modem, DSL, or fiber internet access. That's about 20,000 households. Now, I'm sure some of those are people who just simply don't want it, okay? But still, 1/4 of our city does not have high-speed internet in their households. About 9.6 of the households in our city only had access through cellular data, okay, or about 7,200 households. So when the pandemic hit and people are forced to work from home, and some of these households making $35,000 an hour, those are coding jobs that they were maybe doing on site and said, I need you to work remote. And now they're like, okay, am I going to get a stipend? Because I don't have good internet at home. And how am I going to do my job from home? Because I can't. There were scenarios like that. There were scenarios where kids simply couldn't do their homework. And you had the Burger King and Taco Bell, photos that people were sharing, and kids having to do their homework in places where there was shared connectivity. And it really seemed like the right time for us to look at how we tackle this. And so that's where we came up with the idea concept. And maybe, Mike, you can talk about how that launched and where that sits now.
I want to just step back and share a story. It's an experience of where I first came face to face with the digital divide. I was in Kansas City. Kansas City had just received the award to get Google Fiber. So this was the first time any city, any municipality had access at a residential level to gigabit internet. And it was a huge phenomenon. A lot of people came in, moved to Kansas City to start businesses and things along those lines. And what happened was there is an economical and cultural divide right through the middle of the city. And on one side, the haves, it was going like gangbusters. On the other side, the quote unquote have-nots, it was as if they didn't even know it was in town. And what's really interesting is as I started to dig into why that was occurring over there, I realized that it wasn't an economics issue. It wasn't that they did not have the dollars and cents to do it for the most part, but it was a values issue. I did not, if I'm over on that side, I did not understand and equate what access to gigabit information meant for me as I progressed in career, or life or quality of life or things along those lines. And, I'll say this as a general statement, but if I think the bulk of internet access is about entertainment versus professional growth or quality of life, I'm going to have a very different relationship and a very different desire to invest in that. And so I think one of the things that we have to think about, and this is why IDEA is such a crucial tool and a resource for the city of Sioux Falls, is one, we focus in on the digital literacy side. We help people understand what this resource can mean for you. And it will shift people's idea of what they should or could invest into that. It will shift their idea of value for what this means. And long term, this is going to be one of those resources that will help with engagement. It will help with transparency. It will also help with people the understanding how they are going to interact with government. Right? Here is access to government services. How do you do that? You know, the number of people that are coming into physical locations for us to do business with the government is declining, is decreasing. More and more people are doing this online. Well, how do I do that if one, I don't know how to do that, or two, I don't have the means to do that? And, you know, I've said this before, is that a rising tide lifts all boats, right? It's not just the digital people in the divide that will be lifted up. It will be the entire community that will benefit as a result of what we will now have access to and be able to do long term. So I think across the board, what IDEA is, and I think why it's beneficial for this group to understand this, is it's not just about helping the underprivileged get internet access. It's so much more than that. It's helping the community tap into a resource that can help us be more competitive, that can help us grow economically, that can help us grow more as a connected community, understanding what's going on and helping people actually engage in what the city is trying to accomplish.
So can I go once more?
Absolutely.
So
In the mirror.
I see Andrew Curley here. You know, so what we did at its core is we approached Mid-Continent, approached Pat McAdare, said, listen, we need to study connectivity and access in this community. Pat said, we'll give you $50,000. That's where we're at right now. We formed a group. It's a very broad group that is doing community surveys, focus groups, studying where are the pain points. Is it a money thing? Is it access to not only the connectivity but technology? Is it kids not having the right technology in their homes in addition to the access? Because I think a lot of times in government we jump to the solution right away. It's like we think we know the answer. Yeah, it's just people need more access. Well, is it? Or is it some of that mindset shift where if someone is given $75 additional a month, they're not going to put it into high-speed internet. They're going to stick it into something else because the value prop isn't there. So when COVID hit the community, we had $3.5 million that people gave to keep people housed. But do we need a similar fund to keep people online and keep people connected who can't afford to be connected and who have proven the hardships, whether it's through their kids and having to work remote and so forth? I don't know. We don't know if that's a need. It might be. And that's the work that this group is doing. So what will come out of that work? Maybe we need to be putting $5 million a year in this community towards access and technology. It may be, it's not an access thing, it's a hardware issue. And then we got a whole nother, do we offer checkout programs at our library where kids can actually have better access to better hardware? We don't know where it's going to go, but that's where we're at right now. We know a gap exists. We got to figure out how to close it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are well positioned in the way that we have your MIDCOs and things of that nature that are ingrained in the community that can do these type of big things. But let's put a practical lens on it for folks, right? Because as things come online, things like e-services, e-care, e-commerce, things that allow people to upward mobilize out of their socioeconomic position, whether it's because they're rural, whether it's because they're socially challenged economically. What are some of the practical things they could do with it? And we could talk about this in the context of a smart city, right? Because we're talking about, you know, people's ability to be able to work from home when they have kids, their ability to be able to work whatever part of the day that they want, to have that type of flexibility to allow people to raise their quality of life. What are some practical applications that we're seeing coming on the horizon with either some of our healthcare systems, our e-commerce, or our e-services sector?
Well, obviously, in addition to the obvious one with education in schools, and I think education will never be the same, you know,
Right.
as a result of what's happened this past year. I mean, snow days maybe, you know, toward New York City, they don't do snow days anymore. Isn't that terrible?
That is
They're getting this nor'easter and they're having to all work from home the whole time. These kids, like, come on.
criminal.
But I think what we've seen in addition to that is just what's changed in the healthcare world and with the delivery of services electronically and how having a connection to maintain your own healthcare record and your access with your provider is never going to be the same either. especially in the rural areas. And I'll use my mom as an example. This past weekend, she's down in Arizona. She couldn't get a COVID test. It was much harder than I thought it should be in Arizona to get a COVID test. She ended up going online, getting one overnighted, did it herself, sent the results back in, and she got her results yesterday. And so, she got them yesterday through her EMR, all facilitated via an online transaction. My mom is not good online, but she had to as a result of the circumstances of the pandemic. So I think people are learning more to use the internet in ways they previously maybe wouldn't have been comfortable doing. My mom never would have done that, but the circumstances forced her to have to be more web savvy. And had she not had a good connection at home, she would have had to sit and wait and not been able to fulfill that transaction.
I think to a large degree, I think we overcomplicate what these new emergent technologies are going to do or how we're going to access them. And I try to go back and think, what was it like when electricity became kind of a generally accessible resource, or when the telephone became a generally accessible resource? And I think the big thing that I would want people to know is that, 5G or these new technologies, it doesn't change fundamentally what, the services that government provides or how you do. It will just change the way that you relate to them. It will change the way that you access them. Maybe it'll make it faster. Maybe it'll make it so that you can be in Paris, Texas, or Paris, France to have access to it. It just creates more of a convenience, and it creates more of a benefit on the backside. And I think as we start to look at what Sioux Falls itself is going to roll out, I think there is a tremendous opportunity to get people to think long term about this, to kind of metabolize it over time. You don't have to have it right now, but you got to be moving towards that, constantly moving towards that horizon. And hopefully that will minimize some of the fear. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear in the unknown of what these next technologies are going to do for us or how we're going to get to it. I mean, for the first time in history, we can look so far out on the horizon that we create a little bit of paralysis. Like, how are we going to get there? Don't worry about it. We're going to just move one foot in front of the other and get there, but constantly look at the horizon and consider. To your point specifically about practically what is this going to mean, there's going to be a segment of people within our community that as they gain access to the internet, and certainly in that respect, that they begin to change their exposure levels, right? That as you get exposed to more things, you might consider a career that you had never contemplated before. You might consider moving to an area of town that you might not have ever contemplated before. You might consider engaging with the government in a way that you've never contemplated before. It's not going to be 100%. We're not going to win the hearts and minds of everybody. But what does a 3% change look like? What does a 7% change? What does a 13% change in our community right now look like as they begin to move towards that engagement? And I think that's where we start to see, like I said before, a rising tide lifts all boats.
Well, let's do this. We got a couple minutes left, and my apologies to the folks in the room. I always have good intentions to let you guys answer questions, but we just eat up all the time that way. But for the good folks here and for the good folks watching, I think the thing that is undervalued, and one of the things I do appreciate about your administration, is visioning. Cast a vision for us of what a smart city looks like. Cast a vision for us of what you would like to see, how you would like to see it deployed, and just what does it look like in your minds for us?
Oof. That's a hard one, man.
You go first.
To me, I want Sioux Falls to be one of the most diversified, strong, safe economies in the entire country, so that we're insulated from the peaks and valleys. We're attractive to almost any industry. We're a safe place to raise a family. It's easy to do business here. I know these are all just utopian statements, but a lot of that stuff is embedded in the core at technology and innovation and doing things differently that make you attractive in that way. And so that's why we challenge our team. That's one of our core values as a city. We have 5 core values: safety, teamwork, innovation, character, and respect. We reward innovation. We want people to try different things. It's a good thing, man. And so that's what I see for the city when I'm done in this chair, whenever that is. I want to say, God, we moved the city down the field we're in the big boys club now, and we're attractive to a lot of different organizations, businesses, people who never thought about moving here or wanting to come here because of how we've crafted the city and the innovative approaches we've taken to handling hard problems.
Now, since he went first, Mike, you don't get to say anything he said.
No. I would say that I want to see the city just really take technology and move it into the background so that it's not something that we think about all the time, right? I don't want people to have to think about the technology that they're using. I want them to just simply use it, that it becomes non-invasive, right? Frictionless use of these new technologies to accomplish what cities have been doing for eons, right? Engaging with each other, connecting with each other, developing with each other. The other thing I would say is I want the community of Sioux Falls to develop a healthy curiosity to what's next. Don't be afraid of it. Don't be, put your arms out and prevent it. Just develop a healthy curiosity that says, I wonder what if, golly gee, what if, right? What would it look like if we bring this on? What could we accomplish? How might it be? Developing that healthy curiosity is going to allow us to metabolize those transitions way easier.
Teaser here. He's kicking around the Citizens Technology Council, or whatever we want to call it, people in the private sector who want to have input into these technological advances. We got concerns about, facial recognition and stuff. That should be bubbling up through this technology council that we have of people, citizens within the community. So I know that's a vision that Mike has, to have that be a board, just like we have a parks board, just like we have a planning commission. We need a citizens technology board that helps us advance these technologies in the community.
Yeah, that's a great call to participate. I think that's a great thing to think about, that everybody should be participating in these conversations as much as possible so we can make sure we get everyone's input. This is a conversation we look to extend. I hope you would all be willing to come back. So we'll do that. Please like and share this. We want as many people to be a part of this conversation as possible. Tony, you want to pop back up here? Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mike, for being here. And like Vonnie said, we would like to have you back as you continue forward on the journey of making our city a better place. Next week, February 8th, we will have a group of restaurant owners going to talk about their journey over the past year, some of the valleys, and hopefully we've had some of our restaurants had a light shine on them recently. So we'll talk a little bit about that. The 15th of February, we'll be celebrating President's Day, so we will not meet. And the 22nd, you can look forward to a South Dakota Hall of Fame panel, which will include at least one Rotarian. So with that, our meeting is adjourned. Have a great week. Well done.